So activism can be a very vital part of the healing and thriving and resilience of students. And sometimes it can make things worse. So I think helping our students to make sense of what kinds of activism, what the threshold is for their activism and their participation, what sort of scaffolding of resources and support they need as they participate in activism are all part of the ecosystem, I would like to call it, of participating in change.
The role that activism plays in the role of students healing is, I feel, a lot of roles. So one is them being able to take that agency and power back about their identity or about an issue that they're advocating or playing a role in activism about.
I believe that activism can promote healing in two ways, on the individual way and on the collective way. And when we think about individual ways, really increase of racial pride, increase a sense of efficacy, commitment to civic engagement, commitment to creating a more democratic, just society. I also think that activism promotes our community because it can transform actual policies and practices that can create conditions in which healing can occur.
The ability to be able to kind of learn and contextualize things is very important. And a lot of times, even when students learn about this, they try to bring that information back to their families, and then there's a larger conversation about that in itself, right? Like, what's the historical context? What were the things happening when you migrated? Was it a program? And so that begins also the healing process, not only for the student, but also for the family.
I think activism means everything. I think that's probably the other area where I see people heal a lot is when they actually take agency and try to make change. My experience, not only as a faculty member, but as an administrator, nothing really changes unless students are behind it.
I think activism can be a way that students can move towards healing, but I also think it's important to realize that sometimes activism in and of itself is stressful.
If somebody is involved with activism and not practicing self-care, it can increase burnout, frustration. We also see negative impact on grades and other academic performances. To protect activists and to ensure that it in fact is healing, that they themselves would have to practice self-care or else it would be counterproductive. And self-care is not just taking baths and dancing and relaxing, although I think that there's nothing wrong with that, and I think people should embrace those aspects. But also self-care is finding mentors who can understand, help, and usher you could be an aspect of self-care. Finding your group of people that you belong to and engage in just discussions so that you can validate one another's experience.
A lot of times students believe, especially in the role of activism, that protest or anger is the way to get their message across. Or they come up with multiple solutions, many of which have been already done and tried and failed. So having some people with a track record who have been around to guide them, to mentor them, and to help them in their activist efforts, I think, that's a winning combination. Student turnover is oftentimes very quick, especially in terms of once students reach a potential level of leadership, then they're about to graduate. And therefore, it's important for there to be a community of people to support these students in their activist efforts. And that doesn't necessarily need to be just faculty of color. I think everyone needs to be involved in these efforts, not only to provide that community of support, but also to provide mentorship so that this process of activism can be sustained.
So one of our things as college educators and what universities would like is to see that our students or future alumni are civically engaged, are invested in terms of promoting democracy. And so student activism can set the stage for future civic engagement activities or continued this understanding about what it means to participate and push for democracy. So I think those are really important for us to consider.
So student activism can be a double-edged sword, that it can be affirming and empowering due to a connection to a collective and to a cause greater than oneself. But it can also be depleting and exhausting and also potentially re-traumatizing. So As we support and encourage students to engage in activism, the activism that's necessary for social change, that we also need to think about the supports that students need in order to engage in that work and to also thrive and achieve as students. All students may not desire to or choose to engage in activism. Institutional support for student activism is still important because it allows students the opportunity to develop skills in critical thinking, in planning, in strategic planning that will serve them well beyond their time as students.